Hello, my class of students and grad students. This is a class on the cinema of Quentin Tarantino. And in this class, it's kind of difficult to just know all the answers right away because a lot of the time we're talking about structuralism in the essay of these movies. In the essay of these movies, there's sort of this structuralism, and it's postmodern structuralism. It's like constructions of big, massive events taking place at all the sets in Hollywood at soon to meet times and all told out of sequence. And it's beautiful. And it's what I found before I tell. Oh, I'm a USC Harvard Calarts professor officially, that I'll get my tenure in another year. And as long as I'm teaching for a long, long time, then I'll get all my other things going for me. I've got a lot going for me. We receive grants, we receive scholarships. We thank all those who send them, even from the government, which we trust, has never modulated our content, only warned us in certain things that aren't so much censored but are illegal to say in a show. And that would be understandable by the ethics you would need of the media, of what you can and can't say. Sometimes my jokes seem a little too far, but that's only because they're jokes and we can all handle that in a film class. The comedy interpreted is that, like, we're blowing out of proportion what's already been blown out of proportion, so we can't really even make fun of it, and we're just like laughing anyway because it was such a. So maybe sometimes we laugh when things get tense in movies because it's like the director showing us something tense, and we're like, whoa, that's tense. But then you like look at it and you're like, yeah, you did a good job on showing that tense situation. And I get this ironic laughter of the postmodern director, this like Kubrick laughing at everyone messing up their lines, at people, and like it didn't happen much on a Kubrick set that someone would mess up their lines. They'd be filming them for so outrageously many takes that you would expect that the lines were learned to the critical point of absolute. Well, it's not. It's like a exact copy of the dialogue in a Kubrick script is what ends up in the movie. I think we can see that if The Shining was the script of Kubrick's, that's really what differed from the Stephen King version, and so on. But yeah, I made a jump too soon. I got this back. The sad part is, I think Jackie Brown and Reservoir Dogs I'll have to find again, and I'll have to urge all the filmmakers of these to release them around the time that I'm going to be able to look for those, which will be later after this whole series is done, because I can't go back to before and order the discs that were still in this class and expect to get here by the time this is over. By the way, this is session number 8, and 8 means midterm. And since we're at 8 in midterm, I'm explaining to you again your favorite part about this class. There's no midterm. The only problem with that is that it leaves everything in the hands of the finals. I do that to make it easier on Coursera, and that way they can grade what the person's potential would have been to end up getting the units in the class or not. And it's not just robots that grade, by the way. I use so many manual things in my writing, even in my notes, that there's never AI in any of this. I have seen some interesting AI used interestingly on Meta AI. Mine personally, and it's not because I'm a pop star or anything. Trust me, I'm not. But I had this Meta AI was making jokes with me. And I know some of those programs where you talk to them and then they talk to you back, make jokes, but they were making really good ones. Like they were talking about like inside jokes. Like Meta AI really wanted to get at me yesterday and still does. And like they were doing inside jokes. They're like, you haven't done anything. Nobody's heard of him since the eighth grade or whatever. I mean, it's like these inside things. And like, Meta AI doing that to me was more. It was funny because now I have to claim that AI has a comedy voice, even though they were kind of throwing people off with the comedy voice. It was still flattering that they'd gone to the trouble to make mine a comedy issue, and some of them were just matter of fact and sounded funny. But that AI can particularly make comedy happen is something that I hadn't thought of before, and still means there's got to be master writers behind all these selections of things that AIs could so choose. You'd have to be a writer that would know about 1,000 ways to take a certain film and then, take it that way to be AI processing, you know. But I like the idea too of like more like a magical made movie. Like you look at the movie Creamister, for instance, all 8 of them or whatever, and they're all out of sequence. You watch like five first, one, four, three, two, or something, and it's weird because like they all go in this like different way, but it's like special effects and even digital effects are in it. With some of the lightning bolts that shoot through the tower of the building, they're digital effects. That some of them are made intentionally to look cheesy isn't really the same thing that some of the exploitation film directors, like even with Grindhouse, they weren't really doing it the same way. Like Matthew Barney was doing it to abstract the image and make it for only speak for the image itself it is at the moment it's on, even if it's still in your memory, the last image. Because something will stand out as stronger than the previous image in his films, in his Cremaster series. And I bring all this up to show you a few uh, discs we've got to look at tonight. We are happy we still have Pulp Fiction. We are very happy, and it's the original case, and it's the one that the menu came out of, and the menu's up there. And I remember showing you all the menu on a night that I wasn't quite prepared to see that I'd lost the disc, which had got pushed back way back into my shelves, which is I'm hoping will happen to Jackie Brown. But we excavated it again and again, the DVDs and the Blu-rays, and it was good to see that I still had all of them for the amazing amount of years it's been, these 20 years that I've amassed these movies and written about all of them. I've written about all of the movies I own in film theoretics and critical decathlon pages, and we all know the story. But now let's get on the story of Tarantino. Now, one thing, we've got to backtrack a little bit and go to the 90s. In the 80s, we all know that there was like a stock market crash in the 80s that David Cronenberg was always referring to skeptically as though it will never go away because people keep robbing Wall Street, whether they're going to be presidential candidates or not. That like the Bushes were robbing Wall Street, like there was all this question, and so there was like this almost. It wasn't. It was a disaster economically. Wall Street collapsed, and when Wall Street collapses, it could lead to everything from like Dust Bowl economics, like the Great Depression, But it wasn't like that. It was actually this really good way of making Reaganomics came along, and that whether Reagan was president or not, I don't know. But they Reaganomics did, like they fixed everything so that like now the more you buy, the more that goes back into the company that makes it for you. The percentages are higher, and the companies are even willing to sell more of them, so that they can get away with selling less to make their money back. Oh, companies are always doing that, and that's one reason I like capitalism, folks. Is because companies are always saying we'll put out the best version of what it is and we'll put it out so everybody can afford it, even though it's going to cost us a lot more to make. And companies are always taking loss on just creating the project, let alone reassimilating or refabricating the items so that it becomes this item that can be made, not necessarily on a conveyor belt sort of thing, but it can be made by only scientists that know how to do it, and it's an expensive process to build a computer for real, from where you stand and from what you do with it. And my computer, it would have been really hard to build from scratch, and I don't know how to build a computer from scratch, but I'm in some internet clubs. Like you wouldn't believe, I'm in the IADMP, which is the International Alliance of Directors of Movie Production, and it's this weird international organization, and they also do digital media production. Digital media production. And so I got in that group because I had already found out that a friend of mine had all the comic books in the world, at least that had come out, at least a copy of all of them. And so, when I had told this really advanced secret to like no one, they realized that I was keeping the secret and that I'd only slipped him a message and didn't really want anyone to know. But it's another one of those fantasies that exist, and like how, like even knowing that unlocked a door for me with the international guys, and that means that we're going to be smooth sailing pretty much as our internet goes. And then the Oxford Internet Institute came along, and they were like, well, we like this guy's internet contributions. So for like these books I did, the Webiverse, and these books I did, like the Critical Decathlon, all those took note on the web. Well, that Quentin Tarantino was working right on the cusp of the beginning of the web was no accident that us critics as teenagers wanting to go to film school knew we had to be critics, and we were all giving Tarantino great reviews for Dusk Till Dawn on the early internet, and that was one of the reasons that our reviews started becoming popular at all. And that's the only crossroads that I even make mention of with the Tarantino guys, is to show you that we were doing like the rebudgeted cheap, like not as good as his work even back then. Whereas you can say Tarantino has pretty much surpassed the ones he's working like he's surpassed in many ways the directors that he's like. The only two that can really keep footing with him is Robert Rodriguez and then of course Wong Kar-wai. Now Wong Kar-wai is going to be of interest for a second because he directed all the best movies of all the last 30 years, starting with As Tears Go By and ending with The Grand Masters. Now there might be a movie since The Grand Masters because that was 2021, I think, or maybe earlier, 2020. That Ashes of Time came out before that. That Happy Together was after Ashes of Time. That Chungking Express, Fallen Angels, and In the Mood for Love didn't all come out back to back, but were sort of a trilogy of just Wong Kar-wai showing off his greatest ability as a filmmaker. He's a great filmmaker because he takes the Tarantino style and just runs with it. I mean, everybody knows that Wong Kar-wai loves watching Tarantino movies because they remind him of Hong Kong action films. And these like Yakuza movies where these Hong Kong stars come in and, gun everybody to the ground that needs it. And then you've got the femme fatale who's Hong Kong. And they're all kind of on this, they're in like Hong Kong. And they're going after the delicacy of like how to run the underworld while still being self-reflexively in a movie. Not saying that you're making a movie about the movie, but that does kind of occur in this film, Fallen Angels. But that everything is so cinematically, grotesquely revealed to be a certain type of shot special effect of the in the camera and out of the camera, and this isn't really what you'd consider a special effect film. Now that's one of the things Tarantino does with his special effects too, is you would expect them to just go in and like put them over the top, and just like if there was a scene that required a special effect, then you would do it digitally so you wouldn't have to work with it as much. But in these, they do it different ways. They look at it from the angle that it's going to be at, or the angle that it's coming through, or whether they fight somebody. They've got it choreographed, like in Kill Bill 1, when Vivica A. Fox and Uma Thurman are fighting in that small house, and they're smashing each other over. I mean, all that's measured out and choreographed. That reminds me of the scene from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio kill the Mansons. Like that scene in the house in Hollywood or in L.A. where Vivica A. Fox is defending her daughter's defending her, and Uma Thurman's coming to get both of them because she was going to let the little girl go, but then she's like, oh, I've been tricked into this sort of sitting duck position. And so you see how the violence is aesthetic, and it's all proven in that. Well, they're using the aesthetic of cinema and the Lovers on the Run genre. The Lovers on the Run genre being where Tarantino does True Romance and Natural Born Killers, and all of his Love on the Run romances, which there were others too of his. And then we go through the whole night again. It's They Drive by Night, Done Crazy, just to skip a few, Bonnie and Clyde, And you see these Lovers on the Run movies, and then like Natural Born Killers ends up becoming like the ultimate Lovers on the Run movie. And why? Because they speak to the sense that they're going to aestheticize, which means artistically lay out the way the violence looks so that it's like mildly beautiful how the violence looks. So everything gets mildly imbued by how it looks, but the Fallen Angels takes the step that everything's aestheticized. Everywhere there's a camera that could be, we're making a movie and we're going to aestheticize everything in the movie as well as draw attention to that's what we're doing. And certainly, Reservoir Dogs and now Pulp Fiction, especially with their editing design, and Jackie Brown with its editing design, draws attention to the fact self-reflexively that they're making a movie and this is the apparatus. The making a movie and this is the apparatus all comes together in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where they show a film about making a film by Tarantino, who's always wanted to do different genres, but always when I winds up doing one of those, I'm completing a series type thing. And that Fallen Angels got a lot of attention because Tarantino put it out in his production company is true. That he released these Rolling Thunder versions of the Fallen Angels, Chunking Express, and even In the Mood for Love. The Rolling Thunder company was founded by Tarantino, and he knew that Wong Kar-wai had linked to it, and other Asian directors, not just from Hong Kong, were in that league of let's get these movies out. And really, the only one to really soar above all others in that, besides like the Peking Opera Blues team and the Peking Opera Blues guy were from China, but these guys are from China, they're just from Hong Kong. And then we get this really big sense of like the Bruce Lee cinema of being it all, hammering out the things that are exciting about action. And then later in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, even Bruce Lee gets sucker punched by Brad Pitt's character. And so even Bruce Lee, who has really grounded himself in making movies, especially like Kill Bill 1, where his movie Enter the Dragon is like he has to go into this fortress and kill all these guards and kill the evil ninja leader and then save the girl that was meant to be his and get out of there before the whole place blows. And they get out of there right before the place blows. And so in Kill Bill Volume 1, it's like Enter the Dragon when she's fighting the Lucy Liu character because she has to fight like these 40 different ninjas at once, and they've got like weapons that are flying and everything's going slow-mo and fast-mo, and it's a beautifully choreographed scene. The whole thing was choreographed. And what was weird about that was there was like this band in it, the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8s or something, and they were part of the ninjas that were fighting. And the band fighting too reminded me of Dusk Till Dawn, when the vampires were part of the band. And so now we've got the assassins as part of the band, and they're all getting put one down, and it's like with Lucy Liu's character, she had a lot of collateral. She had to beat like these extreme ninjas. I mean, after that, she can go on to do great things, but things get harder, things get more difficult in other challenging ways in Kill Bill. Like nothing is predictable. As much as we want to say we know something's going to happen because we've seen like a trailer of it or a preview or we saw it ourselves, we saw part of it ourselves. With these movies, until you've seen the whole thing, you can't really explain it because they are jigsaw cutting. If you changed it any other way, it would throw the loop off that was already being detected as what needed to be perceived in Pulp Fiction and everything. And you take a structuralist look at Pulp Fiction, and I don't think, the characters to a Tarantino movie are very poor. Like, I don't think so. Like, even though the middle class kind of comes out supposedly in the Kurt Russell character, he's still doing that on purpose to kind of shine away from the fact that he is a famous stuntman and he wants to attract people too. But that we take a look at Grindhouse and we take a look at all the people that were in those, and a lot of them had professions that were like upper class. And I'm not saying that Tarantino's not like saying that the poor don't get a shake too. There's kind of this feeling of the underdog in some of his movies, but there aren't very many poor in this. And so you go back to the 80s where like they filled up Wall Street with money, and then now Tarantino, when he gets to Reservoir Dogs and sees that he can actually get real money for the filmmaking process. He decides to become a filmmaker. A good idea when you're getting money offered to do what they're offering you to do the money for, even if you don't take the money. You got to do what they're offering it for because there's some legal law on that. But once we saw that Reservoir Dogs had staying power of that they bought out the theaters till 1998 with Reservoir Dogs starting in 1993. And I'm not saying that it's just this like rich allocated media. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that like the spectacle of it all requires a budget, but that budget's already been paid in some way to all the films that we're transcribing into our own. Basically, the Rebel Without a Cause even cover look to these movies is interesting. This is how Grindhouse compares to Pulp Fiction. And you can see Pulp Fiction still has that cover through where you can see Mia Wallace or Uma Thurman's character in that picture. And then we come to Grindhouse, and then what's reminding me of Grindhouse and Pulp Fiction is that Pulp Fiction is saying we take all the wood pulp that the book's made of, and we compress it into a book, and that book's got to be written on it with a narrative form. That's what he's actually saying, writing on a just pressed book, the narrative form, whether it's by typewriter, printer, or whatever. But that's what they used to do with those paperback writer type dime store, nickel and dime store novels. They'd make this detective case out of it, and then sort of like a Chinatown type thing, film noir. And then they'd have all these gritty underworld scenes of gangsters, and it would be like these press print, almost generic type books like that with Pulp Fiction. With pulp, you're massing a lot of books. When it's fiction and it's pulp, that means it's like one of those $5 books, like only talk about Batman's early days. It's like a book that you can't get your hands on anymore. But if you see how the Library of Congress seal away these old detective novels of Hammett and Raymond Chandler, and you get kind of into these characters. Even Bogey played in The Big Sleep. And, you know, the point is that like the Pulp Fiction was the grindhouse of what it meant at the time. Because Grindhouse only takes it a step further by saying, yeah, but now we're truly exploitation film, or Pulp Fiction kind of has this whole. Sorry about that cough. Smoker cough. Pulp Fiction has this array of decorative building and smolder and things that are cool, and it's got the restaurant rehabilitated as like a 1950s place. And Grindhouse, everything's there to get destroyed, destroyed, destroyed. Like it's like you set up anything that's cool, you destroy it later. In Grindhouse, Planet Terror works the same way. And Robert Rodriguez likes to work with Tarantino because, as I said before, they work together, but a lot of time they don't get to talk very much, and they are friends, but they don't get to spend much time together because they all work. And one of the things you'll notice about top directors is they're always working, whether it's their director job, which usually it is in some way anyway, but they're directing another, they're using their ability for another job, so that they cross paths so many times is because they scored up a lot of their scripts at the start of all this and said, wow, we could work together on some of these. They're so similar scripts. So Grindhouse is my favorite one of all because it's not just saying it's Pulp Fiction, it's saying and then it's like Burning Man. We're going to grind it down. And it's like intolerable cruelty, not intolerable cruelty, intolerable bastards, inglorious bastards. You take this same thing from like the theater's going to be blown up, and Grindhouse obviously is the one we're watching from, made to look like that, made to look like it's about to blow up. But the one in the later film, Inglourious Bastards, which we have to get to next time, we don't have to, but we're getting close to Inglourious Bastards, and we have to go on beyond Kill Bill and Grindhouse. But we still have so much to talk about in all these films. And I didn't bring all the films over this time. I did show Fallen Angels. The Kill Bill films, really, I mean, one thing I'd have to do to wrap up the story on these, but I'm still going to come back to them and we'll learn more, is that you do have this independent notion that the Jackie Brown and Reservoir Dogs had in Pulp Fiction, but In this one, it's such a ninja film, and it's such a like learning the Eastern art and Eastern craft of like Hong Kong ninja and Hong Kong like and Japanese samurai and Japanese yakuza. Like Sonny Chiba was doing the yakuza films, and they were considered cheap. Tarantino helped resurrect those back in the VHS day. They were doing a lot with VHS, and that was all to get help Wall Street get a jump start since it's crashed in the 80s. And like finally, the independent films were saying we can launch these big lucrative films for the studio and actually get studio backing while still being an independent, because independently we're making it the way they want to, and we already signed a contract that says we get final cut. Final cut doesn't necessarily mean carte blanche, but it's pretty close, because carte blanche says you have control over everything, and I'm not sure if only Orson Welles gets that for Citizen Kane, and Murnau for Sunrise, but Murnau didn't have to deal with his too much of the music unit on that one, although it did have sound special effects. Now, you think that these films are going to be risky if they're called Kill Bill. You think they're going to be risky if they have like a female superhero and it's a Tarantino movie. But one thing Tarantino knows how to do is entertain, and we've already learned from Reservoir Dogs staying out so long that people have staying power. People come back. They want to see the complex Chinese box stories open again. They want their entertainment. They have entertainment. Every time a plot concept is resolved in Kill Bill, usually someone gets killed at that point. That sets off a stage for our pleasure zone of watching how aesthetic or artistically done the scene of the character dying is, because it's fun to see someone die in an unusual way, in a way that couldn't be really how they died, usually. And we all know is fake special effects that sometimes people get caught up and they think that they really did have a sword fight, Uma Thurman and Lucy Liu, and maybe they did, but that to think that Lucy Liu got her brain cut off, I don't think so. She was probably filmed out of sequence in the whole thing. They might have even had some kind of talk beforehand about how they wanted to make it look really real, and they did a great job. And it's like this whole anime sword fight type battle, and the clunking of the water in the background. Man, I think Kill Bill movies deserve a hand, dude. They deserve an applause by me, because really, it's like you get right out of Jackie Brown land, and it's like really this is all hedging to be an exploitation medium, but done in an A-grade way. And not only that, that's what neo-noir kind of is. Except neo-noir takes old B-film noirs and revamps them into A-noirs. And that's why for a while it became big to sharp up old B films anyway, like Ed Wood films finally made scary, or anybody upgrades an old like Psycho by Hitchcock, now done by Gus Van Sant, but it's the same way he did it, but it looks completely different, and it's the same exact way he directed it, and it's similar. There's all these studies you can do in film school about movies. I suggest somebody does a shot-by-shot explanation of Pulp Fiction. It'd be so fascinating to see what each shot goes to. I bet there'd be more of the type of editing that was spent in different ways. Now, carte blanche versus final cut. Final cut just means you have the final say on what the definitive version is going to look like in theaters that they're going to play to millions of screens. The exclusive versions, the versions that exist but don't, well, they're worth going after. If you really think you can find any of them, you might have to go to a foreign country to find the other versions of Pulp Fiction. But the version I have, this one, is my favorite one, is one I've seen mostly, and it's still the one directed by Tarantino. And it's strange because it says that it's his second film. And we know that this is his second film. So we're really thinking he's going to have like this whole slew of films, or he'll just release one every few years, like Stanley Kubrick, and he only has 9 films if you put Kill Bill 1 and 2 together, and you don't count Planet Terror as part of his directing. And more about Robert Rodriguez is he came from the El Mariachi, Desperado, Blood Wedding, like he came from the grittier side of underground Mexico in its plight in El Norte to find freedom in America. And you'll see from the Machete movies that they really don't have much freedom in America. And Spy Kids, America's system is held up as patriotic because children can maneuver the government's exercises in a good way, and they're really smart, so they get credit for that. But being the cynical Sin City or Machete, usually things don't end up always rosy in comparison. And not always in the Spy Kids either. They hit some, you know, into the road, into the maze, wrong ways, dead ends, and, another thing about Rodriguez was he made this Faculty, which was about that school getting taken over by aliens. It was kind of a Hollywood thing that he did to grow Dimension Films, which he pretty much put Dimension Films on the map. There were other horror films coming out across Dimension Films, but Dusk Till Dawn and all the others that came across Dimension, which was a sublet of Miramax. Now you have to remember about Miramax, it was a sublet of Disney. So that Disney's always been behind these films of Tarantino. It's kind of a surprise to him later to find out because he's using all the studios can muster, and ultimately the studio that wants the release for this is Miramax. Now I know Miramax still exists, but I'm not really sure who all runs it now. And I know that the Miramax guys got in trouble. Probably talk about that more a little bit. Just there's nothing to talk about. So the Weinstein brothers, who've been giving generously to Tarantino's film budgets, but not as generously as we had hoped. Because of the money made, they should have been giving Tarantino and Rodriguez a lot more money, and they were stealing it from them. And the agreement got sketchy, and that was one of the reasons those guys got appointed to as fraudulent. And they had done some other things with themselves as perverts, but who cares about that? That's like gossip shit. The main thing is that they were cheating Tarantino and cheating Rodriguez. And I didn't know that they were cheating him for so long, but which is really hardly even shows with the films, because the films look so bombastic. That's why I said they're not a poor man's cinema totally, because to go over one of these type of grindhouse movies, you got to go over it with a digital fine tooth comb, and you got to wreck the photo, just like by having scenes of it burn out. And this version I like the most because it has both films back to back and a few trailers that you don't get on the other version. Now the trailers are fake on Grindhouse, right? The trailers are fake on Grindhouse, but that Machete started out as a fake trailer on Grindhouse is true. That Hobo with a Shotgun is a Grindhouse movie from this series becoming a production company is more how that one got in there. And Werewolf Women of the SS is actually a movie, but has already been made. And the remake by Eric Roth did those commercials. And then Tarantino would have had to have done a commercial in there too. And so they all did fake commercials, and they all tidied them up to be in the middle of the two movies, and that's how it was showed theatrically. And in the director's cut of both movies, it has the title of the film that it is from Grindhouse, so it has like Death Proof and Planet Terror in two separate director's cuts. And I've seen both of those, and they do put some scenes back in that you can't see otherwise, but sometimes I think there is a 4-hour theatrical cut out there, and I think it's a long time from now that they'll be not using the word cut anymore, because the word implies like a slice of banana or something. Well, you cut this banana in half, I need a slice of banana. But when you're talking about film, you edit it. And I just say, please, it's the final edit. And nobody really has to listen to my instruction. I'm just saying, like, people have like in the film business, we use the word cut. We say cut to this, and I don't even want to bring it up. But in a script, that's normal perfect writing of the script to say cut to, and then you go to the next scene. But if we could get in the habit of doing things that my friends tell me to do, and that is use the word edit. So I'm going to try, but I know I still fall prey to the thing where they get final cut. So they get final edit. See, the Crypt Keeper gets final cut because his head gets cut off, and that's the final shot of the movie. You know what I'm saying? So just keep in mind that final edit is what you should start saying for like a splice between two scenes, because you do like cut and paste some of the editing on the computer either, or do a simulated version of cut and paste. So I can see why they still get away with that in digital editing, but it's more has to do with the edit made itself than the actual motion of using scissors and chopping them through, or the actual motion of ripping pieces out with a deleter, deleting pieces out by selecting them and deleting them. It actually has to do with, bam, it's the next part of the next shot. And not all screenplays have the shots written in. Like Tarantino's have detail after detail of everything. But they have the scenes written in. And so the director breaks down usually with that and says, well, look, this is how we're going to film each scene. And then that way we can decide on which one looks the hardest in the script and do it first, and do the easiest one last. Do all the exteriors first that look hard, exteriors that look easier before you go to the interiors that look hard. And if there's sex and violence, you want to film that right off the top, because then you can make it all aesthetic with your multi-cameral setup. That came from Psycho. Alfred Hitchcock set the shower scene up from like 28 different vantage points, And so we've accumulated all this detail on what it really is to aestheticize violence, and why Tarantino is really leading the pack in this sort of like catharsis for those that need climaxes and conclusions and stories, so that they can get a rise out of it, so they can be resensitized by the nature of the world of danger and guns and gangsters, and neo-noir has all these things featured in it. And then with Pulp Fiction, they're like, well, they're saying that the books were churned out. Grindhouse is saying the movies were grinded out, churned out. And they really took a lot of time and in detail on both movies. Planet Terror has that usual Robert Rodriguez detail after detail. And one thing about a Robert Rodriguez movie is, especially the Sin City movies, Sin City and Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, is that if you watch them more than once, they reveal more than one thing. And a lot of movies you want to watch it again because you missed it. In Rodriguez, he reveals something in the movie if you watch it again. Now, I'm not going to say how he does that, because nobody tells the director's secret. But if you watch one of his movies a second time, you'll see something else. Not just another movie, but like something about the movie that you didn't notice before will appear. I guarantee it. Because there's so much montage that layers on top of montage that's already art decorated to the point of flawlessness, that the zombies taking over the hospital is such a scenario that I totally envy as a director. That's the scenario of the dust from like the Dawn of the Dead, type thing, where it's like they're in the mall and they're killing everybody, a hospital gone wrong. I mean, these are the types of things that Hitchcock goes on to. And that to aestheticize the violence is taking the edge off the violence, really. It may resensitize you in a way, but it's taking the edge off, because it's using like the dream sequence from Vertigo type thing to make that into a gunfight. Then you'd have some of the abstract gunfights you have even in Django Unchained later by Quentin Tarantino. Did this originate with Quentin Tarantino? Yes, it did. It absolutely did. Like with Reservoir Dogs on, you always had the sense that the characters have to have a gun, have to be in a dark suit, have to be, like gangsters. They have to be gangsters. They have to tell the story out of order. And you get these movies that are almost as good as Pulp Fiction. Like you'll get like later movies like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels that isn't as good, but what a blister it is. And straight out of the can of a Tarantino, like I would do this type of movie, you would think through that film. And that's how you know Tarantino has an auteur style, is that he has a style that people scramble to reinvent in their own films. And usually what it is we'll take an establishing shot, a close up, during some kind of written speech for one of his characters. Think of Samuel L. Jackson before he shoots Kyle MacLachlan, or wait, Frank Whaley in that scene in Pulp Fiction. And you get a picture from the, you see it from the establishing shot, then you see a close up. Then you see another establishing shot from another angle. Then you see a close up. And that's the Sergio Leone style, in that Tarantino really does love the Sergio Leone style. And you can see some of this in Rodriguez's work, but he's more out to show a perspective or a line of sight vision, like in Once Upon a Time in Mexico. Even though the guy's blind, we're seeing where he could have seen things had he not been blind, and that he can sense things are somehow there. Really puts us in a different perspective, because now we're looking through a blind man's eyes, seeing nothing, and then we're back around to point of views, being that the characters all have point of views that we cut to, whereas Tarantino's never really showing what they're looking at unless it's a high propped prop, like the square being drawn. And that's not always true, but as a rule, you can see how that operates. So, the auteur style that you get from trying to make one of your own of that is, well, the ultimately Orson Welles thing, that every one of his movies makes you want to set out and make a movie. It makes you want to make a movie. It's like Goodfellas. You see Goodfellas, you go make a gangster film right after that. And I think in the neo-noir sense that was coming about even in Blade Runner, some of these critics in Blade Runner being against the Wall Street melting again. And then you get Wolf of Wall Street by Martin Scorsese, saying that the fall of Wall Street will never happen again. And National Treasure is kind of saying that too, that like it would take more than a holy grail search for Wall Street to end. So now movies really have come up in this decadent era of the 90s, being independent, but that everybody's funding one of these, and the internet hearsay on a movie is just getting it to the point that everybody's got to see it. If it's on the internet and talked about on the internet, which, going back to even Reservoir Dogs, was on a certain loop of bulletin board systems on the early internet. AOL was like 1992. Reservoir Dogs hit theaters that year, but wasn't until the last day of that year, so a year later, 1993. And then Pulp Fiction was 94, Jackie Brown was 97, Kill Bill being 2010, I think. Yeah, 2008 was Kill Bill. No, it couldn't have been a long time. So, wait, what did I just say? So, if Kill Bill was after... No, it was 2002 and 2003. Yeah, sorry, I got off on that one. And Inglourious Basterds was 2015. So, we're staying there for a minute. And we're going to have a few things to look forward to in our next few classes, and then we'll go back over these movies with more of a structural commodity look, search at what makes them work. But I don't have it up here right now. I know I have it over there. And when we finish the talk about Grindhouse, when we finish the talk about Kill Bill, which we're pretty much done with, we'll go on to Inglourious Basterds. But Inglourious Basterds is really one that we can start talking about because we have a little bit of time. It was in 2015 when there was a really strong sense of, or 2009, excuse me, it was in 2009. So Kill Bill was in 2003 and Inglourious Basterds was in 2008. Okay, there's your real timeline. And that Inglourious Basterds got an Academy Award, it did, for Best Script, that it was the year of the writer, apparently what Tarantino said on stage at the Oscars, that Inglourious Basterds shows that old World War II ideal that like the soldiers in America were the biggest of the badasses, except for these Inglourious Basterds, these Jewish guys that some of them were American and they went out to fight the hardest of their enemies to take them down because they were the strongest opponents out there. And this was kind of this folklore going around for years that even was in this 1970s exploitation film about how this Jewish group of soldiers was going around taking Nazi scalps, and like Brad Pitt's their leader, and he's an American, and he's going to lead them to the American way. And then there's this whole film, and regardless of the John Ford Kurosawa thing, where they almost shot each other down in planes, there was this whole thing made in the war where I'm not going to forget this, so let's move on from here. So the war really shows you what blood and guts look like close up, right? But in Inglourious Bastards, it does take a very violent method. But it's also like an art film because it has so many foreign languages. And it's still a everybody go blow up Hitler movie. And that Hitler's the enemy in it, I didn't really understand. But that there was a Nazi in it, played by Christoph Waltz, that took the whole story forward as though the Nazis were the ones we're rooting for. And I like how there's this sort of dichotomy in the sort of good versus evil and how we're attracted to the evil and we don't like the good. It's that ambiguity from Hitchcock that we see and in Tarantino, who is starting to become more and more like Hitchcock in this sort of Inglourious Bastards movie. And as they're assembling it, they've never gotten a break between their movies. You know, they're still working movie after movie, and it's weird that in all these years they've made Perfect with 10 movies, all masterpieces pretty much is what we're figuring out. We'll go through that. But that they chose the Bresson Kubrick train of like not releasing more than 12 films is so wild because we always associate Kubrick with more than just 12 films, or Bresson with more than just 13, 14 films. Jean Vigo only has 3 films because he died while making Atalanta, you know. And then we know Murnau died while making Taboo with Robert Flaherty, who would later get a Pulitzer Prize for the movie Louisiana Story. I've told these things so many times, but one of the things I can actually like reveal to you that's kind of nice is I don't think Tarantino really is in it for the Pulitzer Prize, but I could see him winning it at some point. We run it down here, and I could see him winning it at some point. But most directors are interested in Oscars just for their resume. It looks really good on their resume, and carte blanche tends to follow suit with an Oscar win. But there's like literary rewards that some people are interested in because they're very literary. And I'm not saying Tarantino scripts aren't right out of a novel, like aren't right out of a Smoking Gun, kind of like Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yojimbo, even in Kill Bill, is constantly this character that's playing both sides against each other. They do that in Pulp Fiction, you know, and in Fallen Angels we see the Yojimbo theme every little short while. So the last, before we go today, we'll talk about Inglourious Bastards next week, or in a few days, when we have Masterclass number 9. Remember that, making there be 8 left when we get to number 9, because 9 counts as 1. Now check this out. This Is My Life to Live. I think I had it stashed among my discs when I had found Pulp Fiction. That her haircut looks like Uma Thurman's haircut isn't even half of it. That Godard isn't trying to really objectify the woman as a sex object, although she is trying to live her life to be treated as a sex object and failing because there's more to her than a sex object. And I like that about the read between the lines deconstructionism of these movies. The Fallen Angels isn't just a gunfight, it's a romantic, let's see how good of advantage we can have in our new optimism to be the ones, to be the strongest gangsters, you know. And that's what you have with even Band Apart by Godard, and you have, and they're all students in that film. And then in Grindhouse, it's like we can burn the film, we can throw it in a dump, we can, like they did with The Weekend. They can torture the film stock, they can blow it up, they can switch to another movie, they can switch to their own movie. They can do Ed Woodian in one scene and, you know, make another scene hard to do as a James Cameron Avatar movie. I mean, these guys are good. And that Death Proof is one long car chase. And that reverses, gets really, really far chasing on the second chase. There's the first chase in the first half of the movie. And then there's a chase where he chases the girls that are stunt doubles. And then they all crash, but the girls escape. And then they chase him back the other way they came. And it's so beautiful the way you see it go all the way out, stop, and then the way it goes all the way back. And then this time, I'm not going to give you a spoiler ending on Grindhouse, but we are going to be talking back and forth about the different films while we get closer to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I'm very excited to think that that some of the things may just be footnotes in these career notes that I'm mentioning, but I think they'll help us gain a look at the bigger picture of what kind of cinema really is the cinema of Quentin Tarantino. We know that it's action-packed. We know that it's full of irony for a comedy. We know that it's multicultural, whether it's commenting on race or has racial reflections in it. We know that it's streetwise and gangster and neo-noir. That is, it could be The Public Enemy or it could be Goodfellas. We know that it's cinema literate because Tarantino, of course, adapted even after he got Paul Thomas Anderson to do movies like him. He adapted to the Paul Thomas Anderson, but he's actually adapted to like some Buster Keaton scenarios too in Inglourious Basterds. So really, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying he didn't bring down the house, but I'm not going to tell you quite yet what happens in Inglourious Basterds because we've got to go through the whole thing about how Anne Frank, being a survivor of the Holocaust by sneaking to a house in Amsterdam and hiding out, really makes me wonder why they kept using so many people to go looking for her. Like, did it take the whole army to find one little girl? And that's a story you see how I'm getting Tarantino with it, because now I've made the whole story offensive. It's like making the Nazis look bad because they couldn't find one hidden child. But the way that Tarantino shows the people hiding in a house and most of them getting killed becomes integral to this like European masterpiece of like foreign cinema that's like totally belongs at the Cannes Film Festival and totally belongs at every film festival, and all the languages of the film. There's like 6 or 7. I think there's 5 languages of the film: German, French, Italian, English, and you would say American, but I don't know if there's any Czech. There's German, Italian, French, Spanish. There's a little bit of Spanish, maybe not, but the Spanish were involved in the war. And so there's Hebrew though. There's Yiddish because of the people that are being held from the Holocaust. So Tarantino's solution to the Holocaust is the same as D.W. Griffith. We're all going over to destroy Hitler today. And who gets the first wins? And, I like that movie with Tom Cruise where he has to where he's blowing up Hitler's location by bombing it. And I don't remember the name of that movie, but it's a really good one where Tom Cruise goes about trying to blow up Hitler. Valkyrie. He tries to go about blowing up Hitler, and that could have happened. So when you see Inglourious Basterds, then you're like, well, maybe it was intentional that they really did blow up the theater nearby his house first and kill him in it. I'm willing to go with the Tarantino incident only because I know that he would never direct something that didn't happen. Well, how could it not happen? He directed it happening. Now, that was kind of a tease. Actually, it could happen that way now in the history books, and I assume it does. All right, we'll see you in the next lecture. Sorry I went over a little bit. We'll talk more about these amazing movies and the style of action, neo-noir, romantic melodrama of only the male and female sort. So we thank you for looking at the whole picture of these sort of like blood red movies and how they spray across the scene like the beginning of Natural Born Killers. All right, only to make it an art statement about the nature of violence and how violence captured by art makes it a lot cathartic because of how the situation of showing the violence is resolved. All right, we'll talk more about it next time.